we're hearing from two leaders who have been both integral and inspirational in the development of character education within two of these schools. The first school represented is Northampton Academy, and it's been part of the United Learning Trust since 2004. The school is a large secondary academy with over 1,500 students. The school has a high premium intake and serves the eastern districts of Northampton. It was one of the first schools in the country to be awarded the ACE School of Character Kite Mark in 2008. And Northampton's character education provision is driven through its pillars of virtue, which are respect, determination, integrity, tolerance and ambition. The language of character is displayed throughout the school, which you'll see if you ever visit. It's embedded in the school ethos and in their assemblies, lessons, tutor time and staff training. We're lucky to have Chris Klein today, their Vice Principal and soon to be Principal, so congratulations Chris. Chris has led on character education at Northampton for the last 3 years and was at the inception of the school's redefined vision, which was to become an academy of character and excellence. Chris firmly believes that role modelling virtues is vital if a school are to be successful, though he does admit to not always showing good character when supporting Dundee United. Our second school is Alfred School in Kent, which has about 740 students. It's a non-selective school in a local authority where high numbers of children go to selective schools. It was awarded the Character Kite Mark in July 2019, and it began its explicit focus on character education in 2016, when the school community were invited to help in the selection of 10 virtues around which the school ethos would be built. We're lucky to have Dave Wright with us. He's been a senior leader at Alfred School for 9 years, having started there as a PE teacher in 2004. During that time, Dave has held many posts of responsibility, but most recently took on the role of character education lead in early 2017. Dave is passionate about the impact character education can have on young people and believes that a focus on strong character development is key in supporting continued school improvement. And from the work that Jubilee Centre has done, my personal experience, we've got two excellent leaders here who are at the forefront of character education in the UK. I'll hand back over to Andrew, who will begin our session with Chris and Dave. And thank you, Chris and Dave, for attending.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thanks on behalf of all of the Jubilee Centre, Dave and Chris, for being part of this conversation. Just to remind people, I know some people have joined us just very recently. We have the mute and the not showing your videos just to try and help the system a bit and to make sure that the speakers are on the front of your gallery view screen, because we have a number of participants. Please do use the chat function with any sort of technical questions or general questions, and Aidan Thompson, our colleague, will be collating those, and then we'll share those in the second half of the session with Dave and Chris as well. So Dave, perhaps I can start with you, Dave, and then come to yourself, Chris. Can you say something about how you first engaged with character education as a school, please?
Yeah, of course. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me this afternoon. Yeah, like Mike said, it was late 2016 that we took the decision to get involved in character education. Earlier that year, we'd had a local authority review, which was fairly scathing of the school. It identified that people within the school, leaders and students, didn't really understand what the school stood for, didn't really understand the school's existing values. And it was at that time that we came back from a ACE conference, and we first heard about this idea of character education for the first time. And once we heard about it, it resonated with us as a leadership team, this idea that, we always knew character and enrichment. We knew that that was important for students. I guess maybe we just didn't know what it was called, or we didn't have a framework for it. So it was late 2016, early 2017 that we took that decision to, all of us as a leadership team took that decision to sort of dive into character education, and we threw absolutely everything at it. I mean, we really was in a position where, as a school, we had nothing to lose. We thought, well, we might as well try it. We might as well give it a go, and we haven't looked back. We haven't looked back since. So yeah, that's when it all started for us.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. I think we'll obviously explore some of the development and the process and the journey really that you've been under at the school in future questions. Chris, if I can ask you the same question, please. So how did you first come across character and start engaging with this?
Yeah, I mean, mine goes back probably a bit further. At the school I worked in London before the school I'm at currently, and I had always kind of had this kind of natural gravity towards working with hard to reach students and families, and I found a lot of the time I was speaking to them about virtues, values, and probably the lack of them within their lives. And I think it was about 2015. I kind of stumbled across Jubilee Centre. And it was Dr. Tom Harrison, and he kind of like starting to speak to him and looking into what the Jubilee Centre were doing. It solidified my ideas of what character education could be, and having a clear sort of systematic, structured approach to embedding it. So I'd kind of got the ideas of where I wanted to take things. So when I came to Northampton in 2017, I was given a blank canvas by the principal, who fully supported the implementation of a character programme, and kind of went from ground zero onwards from there. And now it's obviously a fundamental part in the epicentre of our schools.
Fantastic. And Chris, and I know you've worked across 2 schools, so either on both of these experiences or just at one school. So you talked about starting with a blank canvas for character education. So can you tell me where you started really, and sort of the first steps you took towards embedding character education?
Yeah, so I think the fundamental thing here is you've got to look at the local context in which you're operating. So that was kind of ground zero. And I mean, I spent the first 3 or 4 weeks, I interviewed probably about 200 students or so in different focus groups. And it's a huge range of students, so SEN, pupil premium, BAME, high ability, just a real cross section, and interviewed staff as well. And sort of talk to them about their understanding of values and virtues and what they meant to them. And then we went away and we sat as a senior team and redefined what our vision and mission was going to be. We felt that was absolutely vital to have character within our vision and mission if we were actually going to be serious about this. And we started on 3 core values initially. They were respect, determination, ambition. And they came out from really the conversations and interactions I'd seen over the first sort of 4 weeks within the school, the lack of respect within the school. And that wasn't just peer on peer, it was between staff and peer as well, and sometimes staff and staff. There was a real lack of ambition within the school. Again, that was through staff and through students. And our students gave up at the first hurdle. So determination was a simple one to embed, and we embedded these 3 core values first, and then we've developed it over the years. We've now got our pillars of virtues, we call them, which is the 5 values of virtues that we go back to, but we've expanded now to explore a wider profile of character.
Fantastic, thank you, Chris. Dave, can you say something about the first steps you took and how you got started on this?
Yeah, I mean, fairly similar to Chris's story in the sense that, you know, I was fortunate to have a real blank canvas, and, you know, we had a leadership team and the majority of staff body that really valued this. So one of the first things we did was we went back to the Jubilee Centre and looked at the virtues that, the Jubilee Centre talk about. And, you know, we wanted something that was going to be sort of rooted in some sort of pedagogy going forward, you know. And so we took those virtues and we took them into our school. We got rid of the word virtues, it just wasn't right for our students. We called them strengths, we called them character strengths. We put those strengths of character, I think we had about 40 in the end, and we put them out to our parents, our students, our staff, and our governing body. And we said, look, you know, this is an exciting time for Aylesford. We can start from scratch. You know, which of these virtues, which of these strengths of character do you feel in this context are the most important ones that we should be developing in our students? And of course, you know, students said one thing and parents said another thing. But we was able to bring that together, and sort of as a leadership team, then sort of select those. And there were certain ones that came up. Respect was sort of top one out of you know, across all parties really. And again, a bit like Chris's experience, you know, at a time, you know, respect didn't really exist, not, you know, between students and students, staff and students, staff and staff. So that was a really important one for us to start with. And then, yeah, we took feedback from everyone, and that was a really important process, because it was really important to us that all stakeholders felt that they had some ownership over this process. So that was a starting point for us. Yeah.
Fantastic. And David, I'll just flag for later that we can come back to, when perhaps in the general question and answers later, about, because I know the school and that relationship with the local context. So perhaps we can return to that later. I think it's really important. So just moving on to another question again, David, perhaps we can start with you. So you, I know at the school you have 10, I think it is, main virtues, although you develop a lot of different virtues, but you have 10 main virtues, and Chris mentioned the 3 main virtues. Can you say something about, you know, why 10? Is 10 better than 3 or just different from 3, and why you selected 10?
Yeah, I think for us, part of it was about the sort of practicalities of ownership. You know, people recognising things that they said are important. You know, recognising that in our ethos. Also, you know, I think the thing to recognise about character education, and we'll probably touch on this later, is that, you know, each school will do character education will look different in every school. You know, across the country. You know, there's X amount of schools with a kite mark, and they you know, I've been to some of them, and they all look and feel very different. They're all doing different things. Some have 10, you know, some have 3. I've been to primary schools that have you know, more than that. So I don't think, you know, you can't, to be a school of character, you've got to have 3, you've got to have 5, you've got to have 10. I don't think it matters. I think it's about doing what's right for, you know, and identifying what the needs are of your school at that specific time. And it was the right thing for us to do. And I know some people who have been to the school have sort of said, oh, you know, how's it going to work with 10? You know, when we had our kite mark visit, there was some reservations over the fact we had 10. How do you develop 10? How do you keep 10 at high importance? But it works for us, and it continues to work.
Fantastic. And Chris, if I can ask you to just say something building on what Dave said around your 3 and the importance of the 3.
Yeah, we just really wanted to embed those 3 across every facet of the school initially, and give ourselves kind of building blocks. So start with a solid foundation of 3, build up to 5, and then we've called it the explosion of virtues this year, where we've really started to widen our scope and our field in which virtues we work to. But similar to Dave, no 2 schools of character will look or feel exactly the same, and it's such a wrong approach to come to a school, take exactly what they're doing in terms of their virtues or values and try and put that into your context. Because unless you're working in exactly the same school, it's unlikely to work to the same impact. Absolutely go and visit other schools and take good practice from there, but never try and completely copy the same virtues or values that they follow. I think that's a big pitfall you could fall down.
Great, thank you. Now I'm just going to move on to another question, and I can see from the questions, it's just gone off. I think it's Janetta has asked the question that actually is almost identical to one I was going to ask you. And this is about how you embed character and values, virtues, as we would say, within the school to make sure that there has that whole school approach. So obviously, the commitment of leadership is crucial, but how did you work to try and embed that within your schools, and how do you still work to do that? So Chris, perhaps if we could start with you.
Yeah, so it's a good question. This again goes back. I asked Dr. Tom Harris at Jubilee Centre, and this was going back probably 2016. I need something to measure what I'm doing. I'm doing all these things, but I can't bring it all together. And it was actually Tom at the Jubilee Centre that introduced me to the self-evaluation tool. So we use that as kind of our Bible, so to say, and that's kind of broken into ethos, culture, vision, curriculum, enrichment, staff training, governance, parents, community link, everything. So we systematically use that to review on an ongoing basis. We look for evidence to place us where we are within each one of those areas, and then we action plan off it. I sit and go through that every 6 weeks with my director of character. We then bring that to the senior table, and we challenge each other on it to see that we're still moving things forward. And that ensures that you're systematically embedding it across the whole school. Because again, I think you alluded it to the start, a major pitfall is a school does a bit of enrichment and thinks of developing a young person's character. Yeah, that's important, but it's a tiny little window into what you should be doing. Great,
thank you, Chris. Dave, could I pose the same question to you, please?
Absolutely, yeah, and a similar approach really. And obviously, you heard earlier that I said that we identified 10 character strengths for the school. And we kind of could have stopped there, really. We had a new set of values, and we could have just said, right, off you go, staff, let's make sure we develop these values. But, you know, that would have been leaving things for chance. And, you know, working in schools, we can't leave things to chance. We need to, you know, make clear opportunities for these things to happen. So in terms of, you know, how do we make it a whole school approach? Well, a bit like Chris was saying, it's central to our school development plan. You know, it's a thread really through it, and every single aspect of our school planning, you know, considers character. We uprooted our whole behaviour management system and replanted it central around, you know, character. Our currency, you know, our reward currency in our school, students are rewarded with character strengths as opposed to merits or house points. Character is essential and a big part of our teaching and learning. You know, when staff are teaching lessons, they will identify one or two character strengths or virtues that will be developed as part of their lesson. It's visual around the school. Our branding, you know, oozes character. We talk about character with staff when we're interviewing. You know, it's a big part of that. We will challenge staff as well where they don't show good character, to bring them back to that. And I think Chris is right. You know, simply, you know, doing a little bit of enrichment, and yeah, enrichment develops character. We know that, but it has to be so more planned and explicit than that, and really reach into you know, every aspect of the school, really.
Great, Dave, thank you. And just to flag up here that the CPD course, I know many of you have perhaps come to this webinar because of your engagement with the Centre CPD course that Michael and other colleagues have worked on and developed as a unit or module on sort of embedding that whole school approach with examples from both Northampton Academy and from Aylesford School, but also other schools as well, primary as well as secondary. I'm just going to move on with another question. And perhaps this is less about assessment. We'll come back to that. I know that somebody has asked a question. Perhaps we'll come back to that around the questions. But a question around the impact that character education has had. And Dave, I know you had a recent Ofsted inspection where the impact of character on the school has been noted. So perhaps you could say something about the wider impact of character education within Aylesford, please. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, you know, we're teachers, we're always looking to measure things, we're always looking to assess impact. And, you know, I'm no different. And, you know, I'm held accountable for that as well. I suppose the first big measure in terms of impact, yes, we've improved our Ofsted grading. We were Ofsteded just before lockdown and received a good. So, you know, from a 3 to a 2. So that's fantastic. However, you know, that really that's not why we're here, is it? You know, that's not why we've come into the job. You know, it's measuring character is challenging. You know, because it's fluid. You know, character is fluid and to measure it is quite difficult. What we can measure are things like outcomes, you know, and actually I know that our students will be more successful if they approach their GCSE examinations with the right character, if they're resilient, you know, if they demonstrate good self-discipline through that, then they'll do better, they'll achieve more, and our outcomes will be better. Our attendance has gone up by 3% since we've been, you know, since we've made a conscious decision to move to character. I think a lot of that is about students having the right character, but also, you know, now that we've really sort of empowered our teachers to demonstrate our sort of core character strengths as well, it's a happier school. You know, people want to come to school, so our attendance has improved and our behaviour's got better. Fixed term exclusions have reduced, internal exclusions have reduced, character strength rewards have gone up, and you know, so can we measure exactly the impact that we're having on every single child all the time? I don't think so, you know. But certainly there's sort of 3 key measures there that I've been using over the last 3 years to really assess whether this is having some sort of impact. And you know, for us, and I can't speak for every school that looks at character education in the way that we do, but for us, you know, it's certainly had an impact. Yeah, attendance up, exclusions down, and increased outcomes and a good Ofsted. So for us, we're confident, we know it's working. And, you know, come to our school, meet our kids, talk to our kids, you know, they're probably the best piece of evidence we've got, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, Dave, you know, I can vouch for that personally, having been at the school a number of times previous to you being involved and then after. So thank you. Chris, could I pose the same question to you, please?
Yeah, so I suppose in terms of sort of quantitative data, exclusions, we were 3 times national average several years ago, 3 times national average, I'll repeat that, and we're now significantly below national average. Our attendance as well is shot up significantly and is significantly above national average now. And kids feeling safe in school, that's 100% now when we measure that, which we're really proud of. And bullying is significantly reduced, so therefore peer-on-peer interactions are much more positive. And as Dave said, results, I mean, if you're that way inclined, our results went from 0.06 to 0.07, this is progress 8, to 0.65. And we sort of scratching our heads thinking how we made that astronomical jump. And we have come to the conclusion, so everything we've done around character development has had this impact. But kind of probably more anecdotal data. I mean, our school used to be at the end of break and lunchtime. It was like a rubbish tip. It was disgusting. Now it's pretty much litter free. We used to joke the seagulls came, it was all you could eat buffet at the end of break and lunch, but they're kind of gone now because they've recognised there's no food being left. The interactions you see now between students and students is so much more positive. Year groups mixing at breaks and lunchtime, that wouldn't have happened before. Our school was a very shouty school. Lots of staff raising their voice constantly, but you walk around now, it's just silent corridors, it's calm, it's a good feel to it. So I think Dave's right, it's difficult to get an exact measure on, and you will see your key metrics improve 100%, but it's more than that. It's seeing your young people and the interactions they have on a daily basis. As simple as holding doors open, smiling, saying good morning, saying good evening. That didn't exist before as a culture. And that's the sort of beauty that you get from a good, solid character programme.
Chris, thank you. I'm just going to, I'm keeping a note on sort of the time. I'm just going to ask just a couple of almost quick fire questions. You can expand as much as you like, but just the quick fire questions. Everything's been very positive so far. Could you both start with yourself, Chris? Could you tell me a challenge that you've faced or a barrier, a hurdle that you've had to overcome in embedding character education in your schools, please?
You're always going to have some staff that are resistant to change. Whenever you bring something in, they'll give it as, oh, it's just another thing. It's a common phrase that's heard in teaching when someone new comes in. Oh, it's just another thing. So you've got to change the perception into it's everything. It's not just another thing. It's everything. So I think that's been some of the challenges that we face. But for me, it's quite an easy win because you can embed a really rich character programme that will not involve the staff having to work harder. So those that have doubts against it, you're not going to be asking them to do anything more necessarily than they normally have done. But the sales point is the outcome at the end of it, the vision that I know it can get to and where it's got to in this school. I'd lived it before in a previous school, so I was able to talk about that with sort of great passion, which helps put off those staff. But that's going to be a challenge because some staff will not buy into it.
Great, Chris, thank you. And Dave? Dave has just disappeared there. I'm just going to ask, Dave, are you still there or? Okay, Chris, we'll carry on with you. And just for my colleague, Becky, hopefully we'll be able to reconnect with Dave and you can let him back in if you can. Thank you. Just also to say, I've just noted a comment. It has been replied to from Tim Payne, who's asked where the schools are. So just to repeat, particularly for those of you who joined us late, Chris Klein's school is Northampton Academy, Northampton in England. And Dave, obviously Dave's just rejoined us. Dave, just remember if you can to take off your mute. I always forget that, thank you. And Dave's school is Aylesford School, which is in Kent, just outside Maidstone in Kent.
Yes,
so,
correct.
Chris, thank you. Dave, if you could just say to us what a barrier, please.
Yeah, I hope I'm not going to repeat what Chris said, but I lost connection there for a bit. The biggest barrier for us initially was staff, not all staff, of course, because some staff really understand this and really get it. But we had some staff who just couldn't comprehend that being nice to children and displaying good character was a nice thing to do. They I suppose, you Miss Trunchbull type characters that felt that were quite you know, thought it would just work with a big stick and children should you know, do things because we tell them to do things. And you know, there's an element of that. Sure, you know, students should be respectful, but it's got to work both ways. And actually, in the early days, we lost significant staff that first year. Probably the right staff to lose, perhaps. But when we was able to replace them with staff that really valued it, really understood this, you know, this idea of of what character education was getting at, and that was a real hurdle in the early days. And you know, it was some staff that just didn't get it, and the leadership team received some quite personal sort of comments saying that this is wrong. You know, allowing us to sit down and talk to students about what they've done wrong rather than set them at detention. That's not right. You know, they'll walk all over us if we do that. And of course, you know, when people don't align themselves with your own values and vision of a school, then it simply won't work. So, you know, I hope that's not what Chris said.
No, well, it was a bit, but that's fine, because it means how important and significant that is within both of the schools. And I know that the CPD course content covers some of that as well. I'm keen to allow plenty of time for the questions that I can see coming in. So we'll move to those. We can come back to some of the other questions if there's time at the end. But I know that people have got lots of questions. So I'm keen, as I've said, to answer those. Just one thing before we do, I've noticed there's some other comments coming up. It's hard to look at both at the same time. Please do put comments, and if there's comments, for example, like trying to follow up with Dave or Chris or with ourselves from the centre, we have a transcript of the chat afterwards, and colleagues from the centre will have a look. So if there's anything you've put on that we don't answer, or is something about following up outside, we will certainly try to do that. So please put them on, and we can put you in contact again with Dave and Chris after the session, and also with the CPD programme. So Aidan, welcome. If I can ask you, what's our first question, please?
Thanks, Andrew. Trying to keep up with all the questions, so hopefully I'm reflecting these as they have been asked. We've had a couple of people ask, and I know Chris and Dave did approach this earlier on in the presentation, but maybe to add a little bit more to it about embedding the values within the school, within each of your schools, and maybe a little bit more about kind of how you went about doing that and some of the challenges involved in that. Great,
thank you. Chris, perhaps we can start with you.
Yeah, so for us, the sort of first steps is we launched it with staff in terms of an inset day, and I got a good length of time with staff about our core values and how we're going to implement them, so they were all on side. So that was the key thing there. Then we launched it through assemblies initially, and then our tutor time was based purely on looking at character values. And we spend week on week going back to our core values, and then actually it's fine saying what a value is, but how is that seen in practice, and giving them practical examples of what respect actually is, so it then becomes a virtue. It's actually a lived value. How are they going to live that value? And then the same with ambition and determination. And then we started to bring in, we used a reward system that was based around these three values. That was key as well. We did plaster it everywhere. I mean, values shouldn't be laminated, they should be lived, but you also need to make them very, very evident. And then we started to frame all our open evenings. Everything was talking about our three core values. Our head teacher, our principal, every single briefing that we had with staff, he would talk about our values. Every opportunity, I mean, what you're trying to do is over communicate it as much as possible. The conversations you have with students, you're talking about virtues and how they may not have been shown those virtues sometimes in the earlier days. So it's really everything. I could go on and on, but I don't want to spend 20 minutes talking about it. So yeah, you've just got to really over communicate. Keep coming back to your vision as well. I think that's very key. Where is it that you're going to, and why is it that you're doing these things? But don't just expect, if you tell a kid to be respectful, they'll understand what that means. You need to really show them and talk them through and role model for them what that actually is. Explicitly teach them that virtue.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And just to add that, you know, the CPD content material has views from Chris, from Dave, from colleagues at their schools, but also other schools about how they've approached this concern within character education. Dave, could you say?
Yeah, just off the back of that question, really, one of the biggest things that we needed to do to get this fully embedded was this sort of commitment towards developing a common language across the school. You know, the language across the school. I'm not talking about kids swearing. I'm talking about the language of staff and the language of communication with everyone, really. It was all very ad hoc, and so one of the things we did was to really commit to having a common language, and a bit like Chris said, really almost over-egging these words all the time. You know, we made it part of we talked about our rewards, but we made it part of our behaviour system as well. We thought, actually, if we want to develop respect and self-discipline, our behaviour system needs to reflect that. And actually, sitting 20 kids in a hall on a Friday night in silence facing the wall, does that help them to develop this idea of character? So there was a lot of changes there, but yeah, making sure that those words, those values were literally everywhere. I mean, when we first decided on our 10 values, we put them up on the wall by the canteen on a massive sort of frieze thing, 10 metres long, 4 metres high, and the kids picked them off. They picked off respect, and they picked off this, and we thought, oh no, and we could have given up. We could have thought, well, that's just our kids, isn't it? But we invested, we stuck it back up. We spent that again, and we put it back up, and 4 years on, 3 years, and it's still there. And it's on the walls, and now it's all very well me or Chris or you guys talking about it, but it's about making it so it's a bit infectious, I suppose, that you start hearing your staff talk about it as well. And at first it was a bit of a joke. Oh, Mr. Wright's coming, better mention the word character, or Mr. Klein's coming down the corridor, better talk about ambition, but actually the more we go on, you overhear and you hear staff talking about this with students in a real genuine, compassionate, caring way, and it's lovely. So that's just, I suppose, a little bit about how we embedded it. Common language, super important.
Fantastic. And I've just seen a comment. I've not followed the discussion wholly, but about the importance of role modelling and teaching character early years.
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this was something that we'd taken the Aristotelian model within the Jubilee Centre. This was something Aristotle said, but it's not as much research as you might expect, and there's plenty of practice, but not as much research in that early years. So that's a really important
Andrew,
sorry, Chris. Yeah, of course.
About role modelling, honestly, they're some of the most difficult conversations you have at the starting point.
Yeah.
It's very easy to have a head of department and discussing poor performance within a department, but challenging someone on their own set of values and saying they're not aligning to what you do as an organisation is a difficult conversation, but one I think that needs to be broached when you see teachers sometimes screaming in a child's face and then having to explain to them the lack of respect. It can be a very awkward conversation, but if you want to fully embed it, you have to have those conversations. And as Dave said earlier, sometimes those staff leave, but that's fine. If they're not going to align to where you are as a school, then that's absolutely fine.
Great, thank you, Chris. Aidan, another question, please.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. There's been a few questions coming up around parental engagement and how you've set about engaging your parents, both in terms of selecting the values and the focus of the character within the school, but also keeping them engaged. So if you could say a little bit maybe about how you've gone about engaging with parents, any top tips to share with those as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that first.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, like I mentioned earlier, we allow parents to be part of, I suppose, building our vision and building our values. So that was the first thing that we did, in a way of getting them to sort of own a little bit about the school. In terms of what we do, in terms of sort of building character in parents, I suppose, or getting them on board. I mean, we have a lot of, I can certainly say now our interactions with parents are an awful lot more positive. And, in some senses, how you deal with parents is how you deal with tricky kids. Parents actually, they want you to be respectful, and they want you to, and they like the idea that we're committing to developing character in their students. And it comes across, when you've got parents' evenings and things. Yes, we talk about academic success, that's really important, but we also talk about, character at parents' evenings as well, or we've got open evenings or things like that. So it's not shying away from that. And it's about being honest with parents and parents that just want out and out academic success and grade 9s, they won't choose our school. They want a school that's just about that. But actually, parents are beginning now, last year or two, getting to really understand what we're about. And the nice thing is, some schools you go to have got these fancy Latin catchphrases or mottos or things, and that's great. It might work for that school, but for our community and our parents and our students, they just needed something really simple and respect or ambition or motivation or self-discipline. They're words and virtues that are understood by pretty much everyone. So it's very universal. So that was a way that we tried to, I suppose, simplify it really to make sure that we can engage everyone in that, and parents included.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. Chris.
Yeah, I suppose a couple of things we've done here. We actually changed the format, trialled it with Year 7 initially, and that was in terms of parents' evening. So instead of doing a traditional parents' evening where you come in, you've got your 5 minutes with the teacher and you say the same thing over and over and you hear it and you go to the next one and so forth, we decided to run workshops alongside being able to see their teachers. And we ran workshops on supporting behaviour at home, literacy, numeracy, but then character as well, and how to support character development at home. We made the supporting character development at home compulsory for parents to sign up to as a workshop. So straight away I had a number of parents that I led that on and did multiple workshops, which was really beneficial, and the feedback we got was phenomenal from that. We also run sessions for parents, specifically outside of just the parents' evenings, where we look at how to best support the child, and also keep the parents up to date on what we're doing as a school and how we're developing and how we're moving things forward. So we share our action plan with the parents. We make them aware of how we're moving the school forward in terms of trying to be an academy of character and excellence, so that they feel part of the journey as well. And it's yeah, as Dave said as well, sort of open evenings. We absolutely, that's one of our main threads to start with, is we are a school of character. This is what we're about. We're a values-led organisation, and go from that aspect. But every school, if any school tells you that they've got every single parent in the school engaged with them, they're lying to you. You're always going to have this little core of parents that, no matter how many things you try and attempt, that they're very hard to break into. It doesn't mean you don't stop trying, but no one's going to say they've got it nailed. It's a common question you get asked all the time, and in any senior leader interview, you always ask them for how are you going to engage parents better. It's a standard question.
Great, thank you, Chris. And just before we move on to another question, my colleague Rachel Hunter has put a message on there, and I'll say more at the end, but we've been running a project within the centre, Rachel, Ben, led by Tom Harrison, and working with a number of schools, I think including Northampton Academy, Chris, around parental engagement. We have a report and we have a webinar, and I'll share more details of that at the end of this session. So Aidan, perhaps we could take another question.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. There's been a couple of questions around engaging your teaching staff, and I know you've both spoken about that so far, but maybe pushing it a step further and saying where David said at Aylesford, you've lost some staff along the way. How have you continued to keep those staff engaged in what you're doing? And as practitioners, indeed as school leaders, do you think there's a benefit to including a character focus in initial teacher education?
Okay, perhaps Chris, as you're nodding, can we start with you?
Yes, so it's a large part of our development programme. We run what you call learning hubs, so staff can nominate and to do learning hubs throughout the year. Every single set of learning hubs has a character focus. We have a compulsory character workshop that all staff need to do. We do it as part of induction anyway for staff. They do a session with myself on character education. And actually talking about initial teacher training, our school's part of United Learning. It's the largest academy trust in the country, but they now have that United Teach do a lot of work on character development. There may be some that are watching it just now. So as a trust, we really believe in it. And a good plug for you, the CPD stuff from the Jubilee Centre, we're now incorporating that into our programme next year as well to develop staff. So it's absolutely vital. You can't just expect teachers to know what they're doing without giving them the tools to do it. So yeah, we find it hugely important to invest in your staff. And Dave said earlier as well, which is the same we do, our second question every single interview, and that goes from a cleaner all the way up to a vice principal, is around our values and how they see those values and how they fit in with their approach. And we'll spend often 15-20 minutes teasing that out to see whether they're going to align with us or not. When you get that bit right, you tend to have these staff that then stick with you because they're closely aligned to you in the way you're moving forward as well. So I think that's key for staff retention.
Fantastic, thanks, Chris. And Dave?
Yeah, just sort of, I suppose, picking up on what Chris said, you know, yeah, we lost quite a few staff initially. You know, I think that first year when we changed, it was quite a transition year for the school. We got something like 25 staff, and we haven't got a lot of staff. That was about a third of our staff cohort went, and that's got less and less every year. And I think one of the big things that you know, the leadership team and the head do, very good at sort of role modelling in terms of character. You know, you'd be astutely aware that as leaders, people are always looking at you. You know, people always will do as you do. You know, if I'm on my phone at break time, you know, checking an email, the rest of the staff will think that's all right. And it's not actually. We don't have kids with mobile phones at break and lunch. So as staff, we don't have that either. It's about role modelling and in terms of looking after your staff, you know, all through lockdown, every member of staff at our school, the head teachers rung every single member of staff every week to check in, to see how they are, to make sure they're okay, you know, and I suppose demonstrate some of our core values, that compassion, that respect. So it's ongoing, so it's role model. And, you know, this year I think we're losing something like 3 staff, and they're all going on to bigger and better things. They're not leaving because they're unhappy, which was happening before.
Great, thank you, Dave. Aidan, another question, please.
Thanks, Andrew. So one particular question was around the impact of character education on parents, but maybe particularly for those from disadvantaged or marginalised backgrounds. How can we educate both parents and pupils from marginalised backgrounds that you have in your care in your school?
Great, thanks, Aidan. And maybe if I can just frame that on my knowledge of the 2 schools in terms of the excellent work they've both been doing. I think sometimes there's a tendency within perhaps the media, perhaps, you know, discussions more generally, to sometimes present character education as this is about sort of improving, you know, children who are disadvantaged. It's not that at all. It's about working with everybody where they are immediately, where they are now, and where they're going. And often children who are in marginalised situations have better resilience, have admirable character traits, and it's about recognising that, but also perhaps building confidence where needed. So it's working with each individual child, and I know both of the schools do that. So perhaps, Dave, if I can start with you, you can talk about how you worked with perhaps those disadvantaged, marginalised children within your school community.
Yeah, actually, you know, working with your pupil premium students, or, you know, maybe your disadvantaged students, I think in some cases, you know, character education is perhaps more beneficial for them. They understand it, and I suppose they buy into it. You know, they appreciate it a little bit more. You know, when a member of staff demonstrates, it goes beyond and is quite compassionate towards them, or quite respectful towards them, maybe where they've not experienced that before, or not seen that, that act of, you know, kindness or compassion can go a really long way, and in terms of sort of buying those students in, because they've not experienced that before. You know, and I think dealing with those, we all know those types of parents, and like Chris says, you know, every school will have pockets of, you know, 5%, 2% of their parent population that are extremely difficult to buy in. What they do understand is that actually they do understand that these values are important. You know, they don't know how or why, and perhaps they don't always show them, but they do align themselves with them to some extent, and it's common ground. You know, I think the nice thing about sort of a character program is that if you're challenging poor behaviour, or you're having a difficult conversation with a parent, which we will often find ourselves in at times, as many of the people here will know, you know, these conversations can get quite heated. He said, she said, oh no it didn't, yes he did, well so and so saw this. And actually, if you can forget about that and sort of frame it with this, you know, I've talked about it before, this common language for character, you know, and talking about those character strengths and perhaps all those virtues and what was lacking or what we did see, you know, I feel that it provides a bit of a unity with more challenging parents and perhaps disadvantaged students. Certainly that's been my experience.
Right, thank you, Dave. And Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, Andrew, I'd echo what you say. Often these disadvantaged students have got a lot more character than the counterparts. And I think it's very dangerous to label people as well and put them into a box. One of the biggest fallacies with pupil premium and how to raise disadvantaged is you need to do all these magic tricks. You don't. You just need to give them high quality teaching, high quality relationships between staff and students, and a real clear structure. That's what any individual thrives on. So I don't think necessarily you have to do anything massively different. You just need to be highly consistent in your approach.
Great, Chris, thank you. Now we're not quite at the end with another 10 minutes, but we're just sort of getting close to that time. As I've said, just in terms of those questions, we will try and follow up with anybody. We'll look at the transcript of the chat room and try and make sure if we don't answer them today, we'll answer your questions elsewhere. Some of these questions can be answered by looking at the CPD materials, and we're always happy to answer them more. If I could just perhaps pick up on a question that came up earlier from Claire. Claire, great to have you with us here, which is around student voice. And I know this is an important aspect of other areas of education, citizenship, PSHE, but I just wondered, you spoke, both of you, earlier about getting all stakeholders involved in detailing the virtues and the main focus of the virtues within the schools. But how are you sort of, as you go along, ensuring that student voice is maintained and students really buy into and have a stake in the character education in the schools, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first if you want.
Yeah, Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a hugely active school council in the school, and they represent the community very well. They go back to their tutor groups and they bring their voice. And we've made changes to our practice along the way on the voice of the students, and that's important that they see that they are listened to. We use our students as well in terms of interview processes. We've kind of, that's evolved. I mean, when it first started, the kind of questions were, who's your favourite pop star and what's your favourite footballer to the candidates? But now they're actually really questioning candidates on their virtues and value set as well, which is quite awesome to sit back and see them as they've grown and developed. We as well, we offer as an academy a leadership opportunity for every student every single year. So we've got a whole plethora of leadership opportunities where they can come through with their voice as well. We've got prefects, anti-bullying leaders, sports leaders. We've got a group of litter pickers, so they're like the environmental crew. So they go around and we give as many opportunities as we can. We've got subject leaders, so we try and give as many voices as we can within our community. Their voice is incredibly important, and you've got to listen to them. They're your kind of gauge stick as to where you are as a school and whether things are working or not. So it's massively important.
Great, Chris. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, not a great deal to add on top of what Chris has already said, but yeah, a key to us is a really active student voice team that is valued by the school, by the staff in the school. So they have credibility, and that you take action. You listen to them, and you do things, and you implement things that have come from them. That is massive for us.
Great, Dave, thank you. Aidan, I think we've got time for at least one more question, but perhaps we'll start with one more, and then I'm going to ask Michael to say something about the Windows into School document.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Just one point, we've been posting links in the chat box, and people asking if we can follow this up afterwards with an email with some of those links in, and yes, we'll try and make sure we do that. I'd also say to sign up to the Jubilee Centre newsletter, which I'll post a link to in just a second. But the next question, we've had some questions particular to each of our two speakers, so if I ask those directly, so Dave, a question to you. Firstly, you've had an offer to give a talk at another school based on this, so congratulations for that.
Right, yeah, I'll do it.
But particularly, could you give an example of how and where you adopted your behaviour policy to reflect the values that your school focuses on and help build character?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the first thing we did was we got rid of detentions. We scrapped them. The word detention for us at the time had horrible connotations. It was negative. It didn't really mean anything. So detentions went. We had a tiered system of detentions that just meant everyone could pass it up and up and up, and make it my problem, and that's not sustainable. And also, it doesn't solve the root of the issue. So, in a nutshell, we took away detentions and we replaced it with a more restorative approach, which caused some drama at first because it involved teachers. Teachers thought their only tools to manage behaviour was to set an S2 detention. If I set an S2 detention, hey, I'm done. I feel better now. You know, justice has been served, and it will all get better. And we know that's not the case. And actually having a restorative focus to your, you know, for your student consequence system, you know, what it's allowed us to do is for students and staff to sit down and you know, talk it out. And it can sound a bit, you know, it can sound a bit passive. It can sound a bit, you know, like it's not having an impact, but it works for us. And you speak to any of the teachers here today, and you say, well, what's your best class? And they say, oh, my best class is the one that I have the best relationship with. Everyone says that. So, well, why not invest time in creating better relationships as opposed to getting a kid sat at the back of your room facing the wall for an hour doing nothing? Just didn't make any sense. So that was the sort of biggest change that we made with our behaviour management system. And again, not for everyone, perhaps, but for us at the school at that precise time, it did work.
Great, thank you. And we're just going to have one more question, I think, Aidan, if you've got one specifically for Chris before we wrap up, because we're just running out of time. But I just wanted to say, I'll say, you know, when we wrap up, perhaps a bit more, but in my experience, and there are lots of schools, and we have a number of them through the Windows into School project, through the CPD project, but absolutely, the work that Chris has done and the work that Dave has done in terms of changing the focus within a school away from that, you know, the detentions, the sanctions, still having boundaries, but to promote a positive culture, a culture of respect and mutual understanding is bewildering. It's just fantastic. And every time I go to either school, we're just blown away by what they've done. I'm probably going to lead them to have more work now because lots of people will be in touch with them. But it almost has to be felt and seen to be believed when you visit the schools. So they are sort of outstanding practitioners in this area and their colleagues within the schools as well. So Aidan, have we got a question for Chris, please?
Yes, Chris, there was a particular question about the Year 7 parents' evening workshops that you mentioned, and a couple of people asking to know a bit more. And if there are any resources that sit behind them, whether you'd be willing to share those with either via the Jubilee Centre and we can put them out, or share them with participants.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to share. I mean, they were incredibly powerful because what parents want to know is how do they support their child. So specifically, you had parents sitting with your literacy leads talking how to support there, but letting them know the importance that they have, because they essentially they're the primary educators, we're the secondary educators, and everything we do in terms of character development can be unwound very quickly if they go home and they start seeing these virtues not being displayed at home. So it's important for them to understand the important role that they play in their child's development. And look, fundamentally, everyone wants the same thing. They want their child to flourish. So it's an easy win, but more than happy to share resources.
Fantastic.
Just
thank you.
With anyone, and I'm happy to respond.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I apologise for cutting across you. Perhaps just, Michael, just for a minute, you could say something about the Windows. I know Aidan's mentioned it in the chat room, but about the new Windows into Schools brochure, please, and how that relates to the CPD.
Yeah, well, in the CPD, we had 8 schools, Chris and Dave's school included, who we went and visited. We've made films within their school, interviewed staff, leaders, pupils, parents, and you can see those throughout the CPD. But in the middle of July, I think July the 14th, we'll be launching our Windows into School. And it's a small brochure which helps celebrate those 8 schools. So Northampton and Aylesford are in there. It gives you a little summary of what they do in character education and kind of what their strengths are. So if you want to learn about these 8 schools specifically, when that brochure is launched, have a look at it. It'll be on the Jubilee Centre website. But you can learn a lot more as well throughout the CPD if you register for that.
Great, Mike, thank you. We're going to just wrap up now. So I just wanted to say, firstly, just a general thanks to everybody. There was at one stage, I know people have had to leave, but we were up to at least 175 participants. I think that just shows how important character education is and the interest in character education. Secondly, just to say, as we've said before, we will do our absolute best to communicate or to follow up through the chat rooms, and we'll look at the transcript to be in contact. Please get in contact with ourselves, whether that's with myself, with Mike, or with Aidan, other colleagues within the Jubilee Centre. All the details are on our website. We also have a centre's sort of standard email address, so you can just contact that, and that will be forwarded on to the relevant person who can help you. I'd also like to thank my colleagues within the centre who've been able to make this webinar possible, in particular Michael Fillard, who has worked with other colleagues, with Paul and with James, but on the CPD project. 8 schools, it's there, it's free, a resource for those of you who are interested. The link's been shared, and Michael's put a lot of effort and work into organising the webinar today and working with Chris and Dave. And so in particular, I'd like to thank both Chris and Dave for their excellent work. One thing we're always staggered by, I mean, I think schools are like this often, and maybe not always the case, but this just the generosity of time and sharing resources and sharing expertise. And I think there's a real spirit within character education of sharing expertise, sharing practice, recognising, as both Dave and Chris have said today, that it's not a one size fits all model, that different schools will have to develop character education guided by their unique context, but that there is a lot of benefit to sharing and pooling resources. And we hope to work with many schools in the future, as we do with a number of schools already. So thank you. We also have the Association for Character Education that you might be interested in, that also does that as well. So as I've said, we'll follow up and we'll look into these, look into the comments and share resources as you've asked for. We've had some new friends join us, we have some old friends, and you've all been very welcome. So thank you for your time. And then the last thing really is just that we have another webinar, and this is, as we've mentioned, called Partnering with Parents on Character. So that's Partnering with Parents on Character. That webinar will take place on Thursday, the 14th of July, from 11 to 11:45. You will all receive an email with details, and the questions explored will be, why should schools work with parents on character education? And then some of the barriers and some of the enablers, drawing on work within the centre that looked at this relationship with parents on character education. So once again, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Chris, for your time. It's been hopefully worthwhile. I think it's been fantastic. And everybody have a safe day, have a safe evening, and take care. And we hope to be in touch with you all soon. Thank you.